I'm Patrick Daugherty, everybody. Joined today by Denny Carter, who is back from a 6-month vacation. We're going to preview the AFC North, one of the best, always one of the most contentious divisions in the NFL, with ESPN's Bengals reporter Ben Baby and the Athletic's Mike DeFabo, who covers the Steelers. But we're joined by Ben off the jump. And Ben, I couldn't help but notice as I was just going through your biographical details on your Twitter profile recently, you're also a professor. So you're just a much... you're more learned, better overall person than Denny and I, who only care about one thing, and that is fantasy points.
I would say it's a little strong. As I tell my students, I don't think I always feel underqualified given my GPA when I graduated from North Texas, but it's been a lot of fun. We got a lot of great students at SMU, and it's an absolute blast.
Well, I went to the Mizzou J School. It's been almost 20 years. I could probably use a few touch-ups and pointers if you want to give me a session sometime.
Yes. What is a subhead? This is my question. No.
Listen, if you want to know the answers to those things, Medill grads and Mizzou grads will tell you about those things.
Ben, what is objectivity? I might need to know that one too, according to many teams' fan bases. And Ben is frozen right now.
I think we lost Ben temporarily here.
We've temporarily lost Ben. Once he unfreezes, we'll welcome him back. We're going to ask him about Joe Burrow.
He was having some technical difficulties, so it could be that. I do want to say I wasn't in Greece for 6 months. I was there for 2 weeks. To Pat, it felt like 6 months. So, to me, in the searing heat of Greece, sometimes it also felt like 6 months.
I couldn't help but notice. Not to get personal, but you're back, but your family's not.
They decided to stay in Greece. They sent me home. So we're living the bachelor life, and by bachelor life I mean falling asleep at 10:32 to an 80s horror movie on my family room TV.
You may have noticed while you were gone, I tried to entrap you into a college football 25 online dynasty, which would require you first learning how to play actual video games, not just Wii golf, not just waving a thing around the room.
All right. There's a skill to it.
Getting a PS5, like learning what modern graphics, what modern game engines are, then learning a single thing about college football. It would require a lot. But I said that you would do it if it got 10,000. You said you would do it if it got 10,000. Yeah. We're on about 32.
32. We're getting there.
Is there anything you can do to juice this campaign?
I'm not going to do it. That's on you, brother. I don't want to play it. And by the way, if this game's so popular, okay, everybody I know online is just obsessed with it. It's like a religious fervor to this game, right? Why was it canceled? Where did it go? Where's it been?
It had something to do with the 6-3 Supreme Court saying, actually, no, this was like I think a 9-0 Supreme Court, and like unified state legislatures all across the entire country saying might need to pay these college football players some money.
Oh, is that really what killed it?
That is what happened. Yes. I see. EA Sports, fearing getting entangled in further litigation 10 years ago, canceled the series despite it being wildly popular.
Nice.
And that is why you see it's like the man children have all come home, including me. We're back. We've never been more back. I can't decide if I'm going to be Tennessee, Penn State, or Oregon in my online dynasty.
Well, I have to say, I thought I had an ironclad argument against the game right there. It turns out that it was not as ironclad as I thought. So I'm a little bit embarrassed, but yeah, I mean, I listen, I hope that this helps people relive their 20s. This is what I'm, seeing online, and people wanting to relive their college days. I hope it works out.
Denny, real quick, have you messaged Ben?
I haven't.
You can message Ben right now as I talk about the reason I'm deciding between Penn State, Oregon, and Tennessee is that in a holdover from being a very superstitious child, I've always been unwilling to be like Mizzou on video games, the Cardinals on video games. Yeah. I felt like if I lost, that would bring them bad luck in real life. So I've never had the joy of like playing with the Cardinals, playing with Mizzou, I actually used to play with the Rams back and then they moved. So see what happened. I played with the Rams and they left.
Yeah, and so your superstitions came to fruition. I am sorry that you can't play with your own team, though. I used to be the Dolphins all the time in every video game I played. There's Ben. No worry. Ben, listen, we had technical difficulties all last week. So we feel your pain. Kyle Dvorak especially feels your pain.
But since you're back, I'm sure you're not at all rattled after just leaving a podcast and coming back in, jumping back in midstream. But we'll just get going. And first thing anyone's wondering about with the Bengals, of course, is Joe Burrow and the injury. And our last image of Joe Burrow last season, it really was kind of one of the more bizarre injuries we've ever seen. We know that play where he was holding his wrist wasn't really the play where he got hurt. I think it was a play or two before. But it was just a strange situation for someone who wasn't like covering the team on a daily basis. And the offseason recovery felt kind of slow if you were only reading the occasional update. But it seemed like he was on schedule. He's been fully cleared for contact. He's ready to rock for camp. Is there any sense this could be a lingering or even like career-changing injury for a guy who's already taken a lot of hits and suffered a lot of injuries? Or is Joe Burrow moved on from the wrist injury?
Yeah, first, sorry about that. I now learned this is what happens when you slander the Mizzou and Medill J schools. They end up killing your router. So that's good to know. So secondary, with the Burrow injury, like you said, I think it remains to be seen kind of what it's going to look like. Talking to people yesterday at the Bengals media luncheon, Mike Brown said point blank, he's not concerned. He saw Burrow throw in the offseason. He looked fine. He said he had a lot of accuracy, had the power when he needed to. Burrow is clear for full contact, as Zach Taylor said. And I made it a point to ask Bengals offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher, I said, are y'all going to have to adjust the scheme at all because of this injury? Because I thought that would be very telling. And he gave a very short answer, but he said that he believes that they'll be able to do everything they want to. So that is all what was said on Monday. Now, I do want to see him put together a couple of weeks of practice, I should say, because as they went through the offseason program, they definitely installed those rest days for him, basically as a proactive measure. And as Zach said on Monday, he said that no one's ever regretted being proactive, especially in the first 2 weeks of camp. And he declined to get into any kind of throwing count that they're going to have for him. Obviously, it's not a pitch count because we don't play baseball in football. So I think that usage will definitely be something to watch. And if you're a fantasy manager, definitely keep an eye on that through these next couple of weeks.
Well, it is interesting that you asked if the usage would change, and you didn't get a straight no. You got mostly a no, but like that is kind of like coach speak. Like we're still gonna be able to do everything we want to do. And Denny, you have a follow up on that because this is really interesting, complex situation.
Yeah. My follow up is not quite as serious as Pat's original question. I wanted to know, Ben, were you able to see Joe Burrow's new haircut when he came into training camp?
I was literally right before we got on. I was writing something for the website about this new look, and because obviously everyone's talking about it right now. There's a lot of Cody Rhodes comparisons going on. I've heard some Eminem comparisons going on.
Yeah.
So, and as we know, this isn't the first time he's went short and blonde. He did that back when he was in high school. There was actually a fun fact. There was a high school in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that is notorious for during the playoff run, the entire team would have the same short haircut and they'd all bleach it for the entirety of the run. So definitely gave me some old throwback vibes, but I will see it in person on Wednesday.
I look, as an admirer of good guy hair, I was sad to see it go. I mean, he has a good solid head of hair and he just cut it all off and dyed it. And look, he looks like Eminem circa 1998. I hate it, Ben.
See, Ben, as you know, as I referenced, Denny was on vacation for 4 months, and he's just trying to catch up on all that. And that includes Denny and the Bengals receiver core, where there are some moving parts. We have T. Higgins playing on a 1-year contract. What do you want to ask about the receivers?
Yeah, so I know the Higgins contract situation is still sort of up in the air, or I guess it's settled for now, but it soon will be up.
Settled for this season. The
Jamar Chase contract thing obviously won't get done before the season starts. But as fantasy managers, we've always sort of wanted to see, and as a company that put Jamar Chase on our draft magazine this year, we've always wanted to see Chase become the very clear established number one. Last year we saw him earn a target on 23.5% of his routes, whereas T. Higgins saw a target on 18.5% of his routes. So there was some distance there. I was wondering if you think that's the start of a trend that can go into this season where Chase is, far and away the wide receiver one, or will we see the same sort of target distribution that we've seen with these two in the offense?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we know about Burrow is that he doesn't force feed targets to any receiver. Anytime they've tried that, it just hasn't really worked. And I think that when you ask him to basically fixate on a receiver or maybe make one guy a priority specifically over another and not let kind of the scheme and the play call kind of come to him, so to speak, it kind of takes away that superpower he has, that processing, that timing, the things that truly make him elite. I think those are all things that play into it when you look at the target share. Now, that being said, I think that we'll maybe see Jamar move around a little bit more. That's something that they've talked about. And when you go look at the splits on where he's lined up versus inside and outside, we saw that kind of shift a little bit more last year. We'll see. He's something that he's vocalized that he would like to continue as well, be in different parts of the formation. Also, it's just tougher for teams to take him away when you do that as well. And I think that's going to play a big role. And also what happens with this third receiver, because the entire time that Joe Burrow has been in the league and Jamar have been in the league, they've had Tyler Boyd as your bona fide slot receiver. Now, what is that going to look like? Will that be Jermaine Burton? Will that be Mike Gesicki? Will that be Trenton Irwin? That is all stuff that I think we'll get an answer to throughout these first couple weeks of camp.
Well, you read our minds because we were going to follow up with that and wondering if the third-round rookie Jermaine Burton has a leg up on that number 3 job, or is it one of the kind of unheralded veteran holdovers? I think Andre Iasovis, I can't ever say his last name, still on the team. Trenton Irwin is still on the team. Is this a competition? First off, is it a competition? Is it a competition they want Burton to win? You don't know, but what is your initial gut feel read on that number 3 receiver situation?
Yeah, so first off, it's Yoshiva, which you never would guess by looking at it. So, yes, correct. So, because we all got that wrong. And so it took a while. Also, Denny, I want you to go pull up Andre's hair because that might be some of the best hair in the league.
All right.
So
I will. I'm going to do that.
Yes.
I'm going to do that immediately after the podcast.
Yeah. So I think that, the way it looked, I think Irwin and Burton probably are the front runners. Charlie Jones will be in that mix as well. And there's a lot of praise on what Burton can do. You've heard a lot about his talent, what he can do on the field. I think when you saw how he fell to the third round, I think there are a lot of other issues about what he can do. And he's, in his conversations with us, tried to tell us that, I am focused on playing ball. I want to do everything that I need to do to be productive for this team after his college career at Bama and Georgia. And when he was on the field and clicking, especially at Bama, we know what he's capable of doing. So we'll see how he continues to slot in. And Yoshiva, I think, will be an outside guy primarily, and then we'll see how much Jamar's in that slot. And then Mike Gesicki might be the X factor there. And especially when you look at how much they may go, they may sprinkle in more 12 personnel with 2 tight end sets. I know they really like Drew Sample. And when you have a guy like Gesicki, if you can even start him in line and maybe motion him into a slot, even though you're going to be in 12 personnel, once you go out of that and you shift him, it's essentially like going into an 11 personnel formation. So I think there's a lot of things personnel-wise that they'll be able to do. And as we go through camp, we'll get a better sense of how that formation and that usage will be.
Yeah, Ben, you go, Denny.
Yeah. Again, you read our minds about Mike Gesecki. Gesecki?
I think it's Gesecki.
Gesecki. All right. Pat's always tripping me up on that one. So Gesecki, he's a guy that, as fantasy managers, we always want to see involved and succeed because he has kind of an exciting profile, a smallish tight end who's very fast and, can get open, good after the catch and everything. He's run about 60% of his routes from the slot over the past 2 seasons. And the Bengals coaches are describing him as a big slot. It seems like they're not going to pretend that he's going to be blocking out there as a tight end. So do you think that he's going to see, something close to a full complement of routes, or is he more rotational in this offense?
That's a really good question. And I think that's something that the tight end spot for the last few years has just really been a revolving door. When you go out and you look at it, going back to their Super Bowl run, you had CJ Uzomah, and then you go in, you have Hayden Hurst, and then Irv Smith Jr., and that didn't really pan out as well as they would have hoped. And now you got Mike Gesicki, who, like you said, is a very viable route runner. And the way that they've structured that room over the last few years, especially going back to when they got Hayden Hurst, they they have a guy who is primarily a pass catching tight end, and then you have Drew Sample, who's a run blocking tight end. And you even saw him shift in and be the third down running back and the pass protector last year because they needed him on the field in that scenario. Yeah. So I think that the way that tight end room develops, I think will be huge in how this offense continues to look. I think if you can get that tight end, if Mike can be a guy who can stretch the field vertically, even in 11 personnel, that is going to be huge. And that also goes into something that I think will be a major component to look at, especially for fantasy managers, and how explosive this offense is going to be. As much as if you're playing a PPR league, you like guys who are going to be able to get a lot of targets, a lot of receptions, but being able to get those explosive touchdowns, those are huge difference makers. And that's something the Bengals really need this season as well.
Ben, you kind of just set the scene for the next question with the exception of tight end, this has been a really stable supporting cast for Joe Burrow's entire career. And Tyler Boyd leaving is kind of the first real jolt to that. But same thing with Joe Mixon leaving, where this has been a Joe Mixon-led backfield the entire time Joe Burrow has been in the NFL. And it's just totally different this year. You kind of have the journeyman. That's kind of underselling Zach Moss, but he's a journeyman. He's never been like a full-time starter. You have the really old, but still just a second-year pro, Chase Brown. What do you think Howard Touch is going to shake out in this backfield? Is it as simple as saying Zach Moss is in the lead for early down duties? Maybe Chase Brown, who can do a little bit of everything, caught a lot of screens last year, is in the lead for third down duties? Or is it not that simple? Is it even settled? Is this going to be like kind of a wide open competition?
Yeah, for starters, I was not part of the pre-show meeting, so I was not spying on y'all as y'all went through topics. Secondly, I think when you look at it, like you said, I think unsettled is probably the best way to look at it, because Mixon was just such a bona fide first and second down back, and he never really developed into a 3-down back. I think that's definitely a shortcoming of his game, is that they wanted him to be a third down back, and it just never really came to fruition. And we saw that, like I just talked about, with Drew Sample coming in and playing in that protection role. I think Brown's development in the second year is going to be huge. Zach Moss and his ability to get those explosive runs that they didn't get enough of the last couple of years, how they look throughout camp will maybe determine that usage. And that's something Pitcher alluded to as well.
With Zach Moss, then, I mean, should we be drafting him? Like, we should not be drafting him, but should we be treating him as like a top 30 guy? Or is it just a lot more uncertain than maybe we're giving the situation credit for? Or maybe it's week one, and is he not even guaranteed like 12 to 14 carries? I know you're kind of have to get into crystal ball mode for this, but we're just trying to like find any signs whatsoever of what to do with this Bengals backfield.
Yeah, no, I would want a little bit more confidence if I'm going into a draft, and I would want a little bit more confidence on what that carry share is going to look like before I use a premium draft pick in a fantasy draft on a Bengals running back. Personally, like if a Bengals back is on the board early in a slot in the ADP that I would like, I'm going to go ahead and look at the other options that are on the table, and I'm going to say, because I just don't know. And being around this team as much as I am, I have no idea at what confidence to suggest what that carry split is going to look like.
We talk about the carries. Denny wants to ask about the targets.
So it was reported earlier this offseason that the running backs are going to be, quote, far more involved in the passing attack for the Bengals this season. Now, it's hard to imagine the far more part coming true, because, it's not like Joe Mixon was not part of the pass.
He caught a lot of passes, even though, like you said, he had his struggles as like a true third down back. He caught a lot of passes.
Right. So, but do you see that as a point of emphasis to get these guys more involved? And then, hey, if you know, tell us who's going to be running the routes here.
Yeah, no. So that's going to be Chase Brown had his big play last year, was on a screenplay, was huge. So I think you saw, especially when he gets into the open field, he can create those big plays that have been lacking. I think the one thing that what really popped off the page for me yesterday when I was going back and reading the quotes was when I asked Dan Pitcher about being more explosive. It's something that when he took over for Brian Callahan as offensive coordinator, promoted from quarterbacks coach, back in the combine, he said that's something we have to be more. And when you go look at their depth of target last year towards the bottom of the league, and Dan had some quibbles about how good that metric was because of how much they view the RPO game as part of their run game, even when Burrow passes the ball. And I think that one thing that he said, though, was that being explosive is a mindset. and which is code for we've got to be able to go and attack downfield. I think that's something that is going to be huge for this team. And if you're doing that, exactly how does the running back target share play into that? Because, by nature of where they line up and how the routes are run, does that mean you're going to see maybe fewer targets to the running backs if you're wanting to be more explosive? Are you going to want Burrow to maybe push the windows a little bit more, be a little bit more aggressive in certain situations? Like you said, it's hard to imagine them using the backs more in the passing game more than they have with Mixon, given how many targets and receptions he had compared to other backs in the league. So, that's a big thing to say, to say they're going to be more involved. And I think who wins that battle, how that split develops throughout camp will maybe dictate how they're going to use those backs in the passing game.
Would Chase Brown be the odds-on favorite here? I mean, he was so explosive as a pass catcher out of the backfield, ripped off a few really. What are you going to say, Pat?
Well, I was going to say the metrics were a little skewed by the one 80-yard catch.
Right. He put the next gen stats so that he was hitting speeds that hardly any other player in the NFL was hitting. I mean, do they value that? Do they want to get him in open space? I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was talked about last year is that their screen game was something they were hoping would really take off towards, right before Burrow got hurt. Something like the Brown play showed. They find a lot of value in that screen game, and that's something that they really wanted to do a lot of. And so that's a component of how this offense is going to look. I think it really just, again, I hate to just kind of reiterate the same points over and over, but I think that if what they really need from the running backs is they need somebody who's going to be able to get more than what's blocked for. Like that, the rush yards over expectation has to increase. So if Zach Moss is giving you that consistently, I think you're going to stick with him a little bit more. And if Chase Brown isn't able to do that, that's going to limit how many chances he's going to have to be on the field for those targets, because that's going to be the primary responsibility for both of those guys. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on the field on the same roster in what could be the last time they're on the field together for a season. So you want to maximize both of those guys if you have two guys who you feel are going to be true number ones. So how is that going to affect the target share for the rest of the offense?
To put a fine point on your gut feel, Zach Moss is currently the RB27, Chase Brown's currently the RB38. Who would you feel better about, like at cost there with those ADPs?
I would probably feel better with Chase Brown just because of what he might end up doing on second and third downs, potentially, if Zach is going to get a lot of those first down reps. Because ideally, when you think about how you want an offense to look, how many times do you want to either be running the ball on first down or throwing the ball to your running back on first down? Ideally, EPA wise, not the most ideal outcome for you. So if you're in a second and medium or in a third and medium, third and long, and Chase Brown is getting those reps, that's the higher likelihood that he's going to maybe get those catches that are going to be big booms, I should say, for fantasy managers. So at those ADPs that you mentioned, I would probably lean towards Chase Brown.
Denny liked that answer. Denny's all over the Chase Brown brigade. He has been leading it.
Yeah, look, I know that the boring running back usually emerges as the more reliable guy, and that would be Moss in this situation. But man, Chase Brown, he's fast. I'm just telling you.
That Chase Brown screen touchdown changed Denny's life.
It changed the trajectory of my life.
Ben, we'll get you out of here on an attempted softball, but sometimes like the most broad questions are the most difficult to answer. And I was just amongst the Bengals skill players, maybe someone who surprised you this spring. And we know it's difficult because they're not in pads. The quarterback is barely playing for the Bengals this spring. So you don't really have an accurate picture of what it's going to look like. But just maybe someone in this skill group who really surprised you this spring, either positively or negatively.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think what's interesting is that whole battery, I guess, with Jamar and T not participating in team drills. You really never got a full look at what that offense could be, especially with Boyd out. So essentially Burrow did not have his top three receivers from last year throughout the entire offseason. So this thing could look vastly different once we get to camp. I think Jermaine Burton caught a couple of deep balls that was really fascinating. And I think that his potential, it could be something that could be huge for this offense if he earns the trust of the coaching staff, if he can win that slot battle. How dynamic he can be, I think could be an X factor. So if you're looking at a flyer late in the draft, or maybe, you see him do well the first couple of weeks and he's a free agent, that would be somebody who would be intriguing for me as a fantasy manager manager. But I think for all the guys that we saw, we know what Trent Irwin's going to bring to the table. I don't know what the reps are going to look like for Andre Yoshivas or Charlie Jones. But, Jermaine Burton's a very intriguing guy, and those skills that made the Bengals want to go take him in the third round, we saw those throughout the offseason program.
Well, just added Jermaine Burton to my queue in every slow draft. While you were talking, I was like, hey, Ben, can you talk a little slower? Just one second. And I'm going to try to remember Yoshivas. That makes a lot more sense than what I was saying with Iosovas. And we really appreciate you taking this time to join us. We know that your personal time is about to disappear. Training camp is starting. The season is starting. And we really, really appreciate you taking time to join us, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for having me on.
Real quick, before you get, where can people find you on social media, and what kind of work are you working on right now? We forgot the most important part.
Denny and I are day one threaders. We are all about the Threads life. So I'm at Threads at bbaby41, where Denny and I just talk to each other on there. On Instagram at bbaby41, and still on Twitter at Ben_baby. And we've got some stuff coming up on ESPN.com, especially about kind of Jamar Chase and his contract situation, and what I think is really interesting in the guaranteed money aspect of his deal and how unique the Bengals are compared to every other team in the league. So that's something we're currently working on right now.
I was going to say, please still say Twitter. Please still be a dead ender with me. We're not leaving here. We were here first.
He's still on the X platform, formerly known as Twitter, but we're on Threads. We're having fun on Threads, folks.
We're having a good time. It's a good time over there. Come and hang out. It's good. The water's warm.
It was a really good time here with Ben. Ben, thank you so much. Go rest up before training camp. And if you're listening, go rest up as I read this promo. We'll be right back after this. The Rotoworld Draft Guide is back, and it has a bit of a facelift for the 2024 season. It's now available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Draft Guide to help you dominate your competition. Use promo code Rotoworld10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. Denny, so when you were in Greece for 7 months, you probably do come across stuff about the Olympics. You did a little content on the Olympics.
I did.
By the way. The opening ceremonies are Friday evening, NBC, Peacock, all over every NBC property. And just, what are you looking forward to the most about the Olympics? I'm in bit voice. I seriously do love the Olympics. I watch as much as I possibly can. What are you looking forward to watching?
Yeah. I know, I actually am. So flag football is an Olympic sport this year, and I am all about it. I watched some of the flag football championships on Sunday, and it's a fun watch. If you hate defense and love offense like I do, then you get a lot of that. You get a lot of just check downs, long pass, whatever it is, what intermediate passes. It's fun. It's fun to watch. I'm looking forward to it. I hope one day that we can get our NFLers on that flag football team in the Olympics.
Well, Denny, I know, aside from you posting about it all the time, we don't really like to talk about our personal lives on this show. But that was it's like, hope that joke lands, actually. You posted about being a flag football head coach.
Yeah.
Now, people might not really, you actually do hold some stuff back. And you said you were coaching your son's flag football team. That was actually a bit of a lie. You were trying out for the Team USA flag football team.
I was.
Did you make the games or did you not make the games?
Well, and it's an ageist, situation. So at 40, I was just forgotten about, and they told me I did not make the team, even though I mean, as people saw when we played flag football together a few years ago, I have a rocket arm, an accurate downfield thrower. And I didn't get the nod
for the safety.
Yeah, well, it did end up in somebody's hands. That's what counts, right?
I cut off my route, I think, or was I still going? I can't remember.
Yeah, if we're being brutally honest, you just sort of floated downfield.
I was started to float. Well, here was the deal. I blew by my guy. I beat my guy a little too soundly, and then I started coasting. So I was wide open after blowing by the guy, but then I started coasting, and then your pass.
It was short.
You were targeting me as if I was coasting because I was coasting. And then it was short.
Here's the thing: you forgot that I'm not Josh Allen, and so when I realized, oh no, I'm going to have to fly this thing 55 yards in the air, I thought I can't do that. I'm going to just throw it as far as I can. Hopefully, Pat will come back to it. It didn't work out.
Yeah, as a father of 4 children, people do sometimes forget that for my age, I am relatively fast. And
Yeah. And you got by your guy. Look, they triple teamed Lawrence. Somebody had to be open. You were open.
They did. They triple teamed Lawrence. I cooked my guy. We got cooked and left the tournament. The Olympics, all over NBC and Peacock. 2 weeks, or more than 2 weeks, 16 days, beginning on Friday. Denny, we have fewer than 16 minutes. We actually have half of 16 minutes until the Athletic's Mike DeFabo is here to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's a perfect time to talk about the Baltimore Ravens. And we argued a lot about Derrick Henry earlier in the offseason. You and I aren't really arguing about it anymore. I've been drafting Derrick Henry. You have seemed all in on the big dog. You're expecting a lot of touchdowns. Just checking in. Are you still all in on the big dog, Derrick Henry, who they just can't, the hipsters can't quite come all the way around. He has the RB9. That's like 1 or 2 spots higher than he was earlier in the offseason. Still, like why is Saquon Barkley going ahead of Derrick Henry, for instance? And just what is your current all-in level on Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I'm pretty in. And as a 3rd round pick, the way I usually draft my teams, of course, it depends on roster requirements and whatnot. I would say that in a league where I'm starting like PPR, multiple flex spots, I'm probably not going to be taking Derrick Henry in the 3rd. But if I only have like 3 wide receiver spots to fill in that sort of format, then I would take Henry in the 3rd. And basically, it's about environment. I actually wrote about this in my Ravens team preview, which you can find on the site. His environment last year was pretty much as bad as it gets in Tennessee. And he still was the 2nd leading rusher in the NFL. And
it wasn't just about volume. He was still efficient and like rush yards over expected yards after contact.
Right. The metrics didn't drop off all that much. I don't think we're going to see like a career prime big dog season this year as far as like yardage and efficiency goes. But the touchdown production could be tremendous. This is a team in the Ravens that runs the ball quite a bit inside the 10-yard line. The presence of Lamar Jackson, scares opposing defenses. And we saw that with, Gus Edwards. Look, Gus, I know you listen to the show. Gus Edwards is replacement level NFL running back.
Gus Edwards is the kind of like Sunday morning. I'm trying to think of another defense. I mean, Mike Tomlin is like, Gus Edwards still in the Ravens. All right, yeah, whatever.
But Derrick Henry is special. He's a very efficient red zone rusher. You see him, you know what he can do in the red zone. I think this is the perfect kind of combination. And if he gets involved at all in the passing game, which of course he was not involved with the Titans, then you're talking about insane upside, I think. And another thing, he's still healthy. It's not like he's struggling through like multiple injuries each year as he gets older. I think he's a special athlete who takes care of himself in a way that other players have not. And the Titans are very careful with that. I think that continues this year. I think his touchdown upside is 20 plus in this offense.
You referenced something, just an important concept I was hitting on a lot in the offseason. I feel like with like elite dual threat quarterbacks, it's just been very infrequent that we have seen them paired with genuinely elite running backs. And I just don't know. This could go like totally stratospheric. Like if defenses are scared, Derrick Henry's the rare running back who still gets game planned for. We know Lamar Jackson's legs get game planned for. Like where things could go kind of haywire for opposing defenses if the read option and they don't know if it's Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson. We just haven't seen many pairings like that at the NFL level in recent times. And I think it could go. I think it could reach a level that like even like the Henry partisans aren't ready for, and he could just go totally bonkers.
It could. I am trying to like harness my excitement a little bit because I don't want to get too over my skis about an aging running back in an offense that is trying to be more pass heavy. I mean, they went from like bottom 2 or 3 in pass rate over expected to the middle of the pack last year. I don't think that necessarily means much for Derrick Henry's opportunity because he's going to dominate touches in this backfield. Another thing that the Baltimore offense has done traditionally is create a lot of yards before contact for ball carriers, right? And that leads to big runs. In Tennessee last year, they were bottom 3 in that category. So again, the environment is way different in a very good way for Derrick Henry.
We're going to get to the Athletics, Mike DeFabo, in just a minute, but one or two more quick things on the Ravens. Quickly, what do you make of the Rashod Bateman hype? Like, you falling for this again, or is this just like, is there any? Do you have any shares of Rashod Bateman? Maybe
I don't. I can confidently say I don't. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong on Bateman. I've never fallen for it. I
actually never have either. I don't know why. I was always out from the beginning too.
I'm just never super interested in like hoarding Ravens receivers. Why? I mean, there are always like better alternatives. I feel like if you look at the different offenses and targeting pass heavy offenses and whatnot. I love Mark Andrews and where he's going this year. I have a lot of Mark Andrews. But no, Bateman, I don't even see Bateman when I'm scrolling down. Like I just go right
it's
past.
Like the classic. Yeah, you talk about Ravens receivers a lot in the offseason. And like mid-season, you're like, Van Jefferson's on the Ravens, like, leading in routes somehow, leading the team in receiving. Very quick though, does this time account with Zay Flowers? Reached 1,000 yards as a rookie, was playing his best ball at the end of the season. ADP around wide receiver 27, I believe. Does this time account with Zay Flowers?
I mean, it counted last year. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm good with him.
Definitely counted when he fumbled away the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, but you know what? That's -1 fantasy point.
He didn't reach 1,000 yards, by the way. I was wrong about that. I misremembered that.
Yeah, I wrote about him in my team preview. The peripherals were good, targets per route run and all that. So he's not someone that I'm like dying to get, but I will take him. I will take him if he falls a little bit.
So that was the Ravens. This is the Pittsburgh Steelers with the Athletics. Mike DeFabo, who has very graciously given us some of his time as training camp, starts going crazy, and Mike is not going to have much time to himself because we just want him to be a football ottoman, a football robot, and only give us scoops from Steelers camp. But really, despite having a lack of overall offensive talent compared to recent years, we have a lot of questions about the Steelers. But Mike, my first question is, did I nail the pronunciation of your last name, DeFabo?
Yeah, you were absolutely spot on there. I could tell you the long story about my Italian family coming to Ellis Island and the spelling getting changed, but I'll spare the listeners in the audience and just say you were spot on with the pronunciation.
That's good. I'm glad because Pat could not take mispronouncing a name. He just emotionally, he cannot tolerate it.
My Ellis Island story, they knocked an O off of Daugherty, and then we pronounced it Daugherty. So yeah, Mike, we're saying it to everyone, genuinely saying it. We're just thank you so much for giving us the time. We know this is when things get crazy. That's why you're in high demand right now. And there were so many moving parts with the Steelers offense this offseason, more than sometimes you'd see I feel like an entire decade with the Steelers offense. Nothing ever really lasts for a decade in the NFL, but you could go 3 or 4 years during the peak of the Ben Roethlisberger era and not have much personnel turnover, but it's just turned over everywhere. That includes a quarterback. That includes an offensive coordinator. But we'll start at quarterback, where Russell Wilson has seemed in decline the past years. He's been dumped by 2 of the 21st century's top football coaches in Pete Carroll and Sean Payton. He's now with another one of those coaches in Mike Tomlin. What kind of start, in your estimation, is this relationship off to, and just how secure is Russell Wilson's grip on this starting job?
Well, the way that Mike Tomlin has described this scenario, especially with Justin Fields here, is he says that Russell Wilson has pole position. Now, as we know from any kind of race, just because you start in pole position doesn't mean you're going to win it. So a lot of reporters, kept their eyes closely on the way that reps were being split up during OTAs in mandatory minicamp, and also how both the quarterbacks did with those opportunities. And I could tell you that it seemed to me that Russell Wilson took virtually every meaningful rep with the first team. Even what really stuck out to me was on the very last day of mandatory minicamp, a lot of the veterans like Cam Hayward, guys like Minka Fitzpatrick, that was their opportunity to take the day off. And it was a lot of the younger guys playing that day. Well, Russell Wilson didn't take the day off. He took the majority of the first team reps. And so, you look at just him organizing offseason workouts and the way that they've distributed the reps. To me, it would be very much a surprise if Justin Fields comes in and wins the job week 1. Not only is Russell getting the majority of these reps, he's also, in my opinion, and from my evaluation, clearly been the better quarterback. I think that he's been putting the ball where it needs to be more of the times. He's been processing things much more quickly. So, I would expect Russell Wilson to ride this pole position into the regular season as the starter. And then the real question just becomes, can he hang on to it? And what can he do with that opportunity?
Mike, I had a follow up on the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. Now, we know that Justin Fields has struggled as a passer. He's been amazing as a rusher, and that's what we care about in fantasy. We want those rushing yards and those points. Is there a scenario, do you think, in which Fields gets like a red zone or green zone package of plays where they utilize, his mobility?
That's an interesting question. We'll have to wait and see. I've heard some rumblings about that being a possibility. I like the idea of it for a number of reasons. The Steelers love to have their backup quarterback run the scout team. So for the Steelers in that division, what that means is twice a season, Justin Fields is going to be pretending to be Lamar Jackson. So how hard would it be to take some of those concepts and some of those plays, or maybe make it your own and give him an opportunity? Because, as you're mentioning with Justin Fields, he is electric with his legs. And when he's on the field, there are times when he is the best athlete on the field. You go back to 2 years ago, he actually had more rushing yards than Najee Harris. And Najee Harris isn't really a slouch as a running back. So I really am intrigued by the potential of you make a package. It's a small list of plays, and maybe then Justin Fields doesn't have to bear the whole burden of being the starting quarterback, but you could still capitalize on the things that made him the 11th overall pick and the reasons why the Steelers feel like he has potential to turn into something a bit more.
I can imagine, a scenario where Russell Wilson is the between the 20s game manager, not doing too much, being told, hey, please don't do too much. And then Justin Fields comes in for those money snaps, basically making both of them not fantasy relevant.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder how would Russell Wilson feel about that dynamic? Is that going to be something he would be okay with? The other thing I'll say is the Steelers love to do, they start all of their practices with a drill they called 7 shots, which is 7 reps from the 2-yard line, basically 2-point conversions. That's when they started doing this. And Justin Fields has struggled in those situations. Now, it's no non-contact where he can't use his legs, which makes him dynamic and what makes him special. But when he's asked to process the game really quickly and the windows get tighter in the red zone, I think that's one of those areas where he struggles. So, I like your idea, but I also wonder, would Russell Wilson be willing to do it, and would Justin Fields be successful in that situation?
I do feel like with Russell Wilson playing on this 1 year minimum contract, right? Veteran. I feel like he has no leverage. He has no say in anything. He just has to do what he's told. But that's just my perception of it.
No, I agree with you. You're even seeing things like, I feel like Russell Wilson has been very accessible in the locker room. And, typically quarterbacks will kind of hide during the period open to the media. Russell's there. He took a guy, Spencer Anderson, who's maybe like the 7th lineman on the depth chart. He took him to a Penguins game to try to ingratiate himself with his teammates. So he's definitely, speaking to your point, he's kind of, on his last chance at this point. And if his personality or perceived personality was part of the knock against him, he sure seems like he's doing everything he can to try to change that narrative.
Gotcha.
We're going to find out how much clout Russell Wilson has left. And if he can prevent himself from getting Taysom Hilled by Mr. Justin Fields. And, Mike, I don't know how closely you follow the fantasy verse, but the new Steelers offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, to the average fantasy manager, he's somewhere between like Steve Bartman and like history's greatest monster. He's not a popular guy in fantasy football land. And we know this offense is probably going to skew run heavy. So this is one reason he skews so run heavy, but he's esoteric with his running back usage. We feel like he mothballs his best like skill players in the passing game, but we know it's going to be run heavy. This is everything about this Steelers team is set up to be run heavy this year. But what is your early read on just how run heavy? Like, are we getting like historically run heavy? Are we just recent Falcons run heavy? Or is it just moderately run heavy? Or it's still Russell Wilson? There's still George Pickens. There's still Pat Freiermuth. What is your early read on how run heavy this team is going to be?
Yeah, I think that if you look back at just the numbers in terms of the Atlanta Falcons and how much they ran the ball, and then the Tennessee Titans and how much they ran the ball, I think you're going to see something very much in line with those. I expect the Steelers to be one of the top 5 teams in terms of rushing attempts. And further to your point, so last season, their first round pick was Broderick Jones, an offensive tackle. This year, they again went first round, Troy Fautanu, offensive tackle. Second round, They got Zach Frazier. So now and then their biggest free agent addition over the last 2 years, arguably, is Isaac Seumalo, an offensive guard. So you're talking about 4 new offensive linemen and impactful guys at that. So I would expect the Steelers, as you're mentioning, to run the ball a lot and run the ball effectively. The question from a fantasy perspective is, which running back do you choose? Because
can you tell us?
And I honestly cannot tell you. I don't have great advice. Maybe the answer is neither, or Jaylen Warren late is probably a better move than Najee Harris, because it's interesting. When we ask questions about Najee Harris, it was always, heaping him with praise. And Mike Tomlin talking about how, it's been so long since a running back has accumulated 1,000 yards in each of his first 3 seasons. Yet when the Steelers had an opportunity to show what they felt about Najee Harris, they chose not to pick up his 5th-year option. And the company line at that point was, we want to see how he performs in Arthur Smith's offense. And that's really a fascinating question, because Najee has kind of been a Jekyll and Hyde player. And second halves of seasons, no running back since he came into the league the last 3 years has more rushing yards from week 9 till the end of the season. So, maybe the answer there is wait for somebody to give up on Najee, get him for cheap in a trade around the midway point of the season, and wait for this inevitable upswing. But by the same token, he's kind of an accumulation back, and he's near the top of the league in terms of carries and in terms of attempts. So if you give a guy like Jaylen Warren, who's much more efficient, those carries, maybe the offense ends up taking a step forward. So that's very interesting, is how do they balance those carries, and what does Arthur Smith ultimately decide? Does he decide to keep riding the workhorse and Najee Harris, or does he look at the production and the efficiency from Jaylen Warren and decide maybe that's his guy?
Jaylen Warren, pops in all the nerdy metrics that we love. Okay, like the spreadsheet warriors are all over Warren. Najee Harris is not even a blip on their radar. I have been hurt enough by this dynamic over the years. I mean, not just in Pittsburgh, but other places. We're talking about Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard in Dallas, things like that, right? That I've been hurt so much that I say I'm okay with the boring guy, and Najee Harris, very boring guy from a statistical standpoint. But Arthur Smith seems to really enjoy boring running backs, including Tyler Algier in Atlanta, a huge back, a converted linebacker, right? And so do you think that he would lean toward the big back, in this case, Harris over Warren?
Well, that was what was really interesting about the Steelers declining this 5th-year option, is because I'm thinking the same way you're thinking. I look at Derrick Henry, and Najee Harris is much more of that mold. I mean, he is very physically impressive when you stand next to Najee Harris. He is, and he's very durable, which has allowed him to compete late in seasons, and he's definitely very much a power type of back. So all that would make me think that they're going to lean on Harris. Yet the fact that they declined the 5th year makes me wonder, if it's going to be more of an even backfield distribution of labor. So, that is one of the questions, and I think that's something maybe during training camp and early in the season that we're going to have to wait and see what the true answer is. But it will be very interesting how they decide to divide up those carries.
Yeah. So I'll ask you just 2 up and down questions then on the backfield. You're probably just guessing like we are, but the Steelers were already 9th in the league in rush attempts last year, 487. Only 7 teams had 500 plus rushing attempts. I think that's the right numbers. Actually, it sounds like very high when I'm saying that, actually. But do you think the Steelers will go from like 9th or 10th in rushing to top 5, top 6?
I would say yes. I think that they will run the ball more, and more than anything, I think they're going to run the ball more efficiently. And so the rush attempts, I think, will be a little bit higher, but I think that the rushing efficiency and the total rushing yards, I think those are going to take a big step forward based on the fact Arthur Smith, I have much more confidence in him. And as I mentioned previously, the offensive line is significantly upgraded. They're on the way to having a dominant offensive line. So
I just had a moment of sheer panic for a second where I thought I was reading pass attempts, but I was reading rush attempts.
Yeah,
the Steelers were 480. I was like, was that right? And I agree with you. I think they'll probably go over 500. And then just gut feel, Najee Harris is currently the RB21. Jaylen Warren is currently the RB25. Who would you rather have at their respective ADP?
I would take Najee at that point because, you look at his numbers, he's like a top 10 running back since he came into the league in terms of rushing yardage, sheer yardage. So, I think that last year of his contract, the Steelers, he's got something to prove. The Steelers can continue to kind of run the wheels off of the guy, knowing that, they could draft another one, or they could give Jaylen Warren the contract. So, I think I like Najee in that point, but again, it's very difficult with this team because of the fact they declined the 5th year. And you don't know what Arthur Smith is thinking there.
I referenced fantasy managers and their wariness of Arthur Smith when it comes to weapons, and just they feel like he wasted, quote unquote, Kyle Pitts. They feel like he wasted Drake London. George Pickens is now far and away the clear-cut number one offensive weapon, skill guy, explosive play threat in this offense. Do we have anything to fear with Arthur Smith, or is kind of the lack of overall target and touch competition? Do you think George Pickens is going to be a safe option to invest in fantasy drafts this year?
Yeah, you asked me the question about what the offense might look like this year. I think it's going to be a heavy dose of running the ball and then a lot of play action and throwing the ball deep, because Russell Wilson is known for that deep ball, and he's got a great deep threat in George Pickens. And so, I think that they absolutely, the way I look at the Steelers depth chart at wide receiver is George Pickens, a huge drop off to everybody else. So he will get the lion's share of the targets. My only concern and my only fear is, even last year when they had Deontay Johnson, you saw situations where defenses were game planning to take George Pickens out of the game. And they basically said, try to beat us with everybody else. And now without a legitimate number 2 or number 3 to take some pressure off of him, what's going to keep the defense from constantly keeping a safety over top, or rolling coverage his way, or designing things to try to eliminate George Pickens? So that would be my one concern. But I do think that this guy just has so much talent, so much potential. And I do like the fact that, his big play ability meshes with Russell Wilson's deep ball. So I actually really like George Pickens and think I would expect him to take a big step forward this year.
You referenced Pickens, and I call it the Russell Wilson moon ball. They do seem like a match made in heaven. He's currently the wide receiver 27, George Pickens. I think he should be inside the top 24, maybe even the top 20. Where do you fall? Is he more a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 in your mind in fantasy? Like a guy who should be inside the top 24?
I think he's a wide receiver 2. And it's interesting because I feel like it is the team that he's on. If he was in the right offense, I think he has the talent to be a top 10 wide receiver in this league. It's just the offense that he's in. So, I think that the Steelers are going to run the ball a ton. And when they do go to play action and go to take their shot, I think it's going to be Pickens they target. So I think he'll probably frustrate you if he's on your team, because he'll probably have a bunch of games where he has like 2 catches, then other games where he's got 5 catches, but those catches end up totaling 200 yards receiving. That he was a lot very much a boom or bust type player last year, doing a lot of his damage in a couple games. I imagine it'll be similar with him because so much comes from the big play.
We're only in this for the pain, Mike. So
that's right.
We do it anyway.
And it does. I think it is a boom bust profile when all of your catches have to be toe tap, leaning 4 yards out of bounds to catch it with your fingertips, sort of catches like
we're hoping that goes away with Russell Wilson and we get a more accurate moon ball. Because Denny and I have talked about, we saw what happened with Pickens, but he got even marginally improved quarterback play from Mason Rudolph. He was actually more consistent and was kind of won a few weeks single-handedly down the stretch.
That's true.
So
from the exciting to the less exciting, Pat Freiermuth as an underneath option, kind of a dump off valve for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, whoever's at quarterback for the Steelers. We've seen several very positive reports about Freiermuth's usage and performance in OTAs and minicamp. Do you see him as the team's primary intermediate target there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo all of those positive sentiments or positive reports that you have read. I think behind George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth would be the second best receiving option on the Steelers right now. It seems like he and Russell Wilson formed a really good connection, really good chemistry. And Freiermuth in general is an interesting guy to evaluate because he was a second-round pick a couple years ago, and he does have the profile and the skill set that you would expect him to be at least a top half of the league tight end. Last year, he was 32nd in receiving yards. He had just over 300 receiving yards. He was like 28th in catches. But he's another guy on this offense that basically the question is, was it Matt Canada calling the plays and Kenny Pickett throwing the football, and how are you going to have success there? Or did you have something to do with that? And so he's in a huge year right now, because last year was actually his contract year, and the Steelers right now have to decide going into this year. This is historically when they would extend a guy like that, if they want to extend him. It definitely works to his advantage that if there's an offensive coordinator that uses tight ends, it's Arthur Smith.
We got a guy.
In terms of his use of 12 and 13 personnel, it was tops in the league last year. When you look at receiving yards by tight ends, Atlanta led the league last year in that department. I think they were 5th in catches by tight ends last year. So they are absolutely, going to feature the tight end, not just Pat Freiermuth, but Darnell Washington and Connor Hayward. And so it's just a matter of how much of a step forward Pat Freiermuth is going to take. I actually look at him as an intriguing guy that maybe guys in your league aren't paying a lot of attention. They don't realize the Steelers have made this coordinator change. Right. I wouldn't get him early, but if you can get him in a later round, I think he may surprise some people and really please you in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, if you fade the top tight ends in the game, I think you could do a lot worse than Freiermuth. I do remember last year when the Steelers discovered the middle of the field for one game against the Bengals, I believe. Freiermuth had a really nice outing. They completely forgot about the middle of the field after that. But that was a fun game for Freiermuth.
Yeah, exactly. He did I mentioned he had like 300 something yards receiving. About half of that was in one game against the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's interesting you bring up the middle of the field, because Arthur Smith loves targeting the middle of the field and using tight ends to do so, and running a guy like Pat Freiermuth right up the seam. Now, Russell Wilson, conversely, that's not in his skill set. And he actually avoids and despises the middle of the field. So you seem to have a contrast in styles, and you wonder which one's going to win out, whether, Arthur Smith unlocks something in Russell Russell Wilson,
and anybody,
or if Russell Wilson ends up holding back Arthur Smith and he's not able to do some of the things that he would prefer to do.
I would guess that Russ will be okay with a few dump offs over the middle if it means he gets to keep his job.
As I heard you guys both talking about that, I just realized, Mike, you don't have to editorialize on this. It sounds like Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith are just going to hate each other. But we'll see.
Mike, just
Mike, don't say anything. Mike has to work with these guys and cover the team.
So I did have one more question about the receiving group there in Pittsburgh. There's been a curious lack of mentions of Roman Wilson, the rookie receiver for the Steelers. I mean, every roster analysis that I read doesn't even mention him as a possible wide receiver too for the team. Where does he fall in the pass catching pecking order here?
Well, they really, you mentioned them remaking the offense. They remade the staff, and Zach Azzani is the new wide receivers coach. And this guy has absolutely been on Roman Wilson, and will proudly say that he's coaching him very hard, trying to get him up to speed and trying to get him ready for week 1. I think eventually, if you look at Roman Wilson, I think he's a very nice compliment to George Pickens in the fact that Roman Wilson is a shifty, speedy, get in and out of breaks quickly kind of guy. And he did the overwhelming majority of his damage at Michigan between the numbers, which would be really nice. So, he's working the underneath routes, and you've got George Pickens going deep. That stylistically should make a lot of sense to me. The question really is, how quickly can he get up to speed? And, I mentioned that the wide receiver coach was hard on him. That was for a reason. It seemed like Roman Wilson, he had some good days at OTAs, and he had some rough days and some growing pains. So does he go through those growing pains and build a nice connection with one of the new quarterbacks and instantly start being a factor from week 1? Or does it take him a little bit of time to get up to speed? That's really a question. I guess if I'm looking at it from a fantasy perspective, and you figure the Steelers aren't going to throw the ball a ton, that might dissuade me from going for a guy like Roman Wilson. Maybe if you're in a keeper league or something like that, and you're thinking more long-term, I do think Roman Wilson has some talent. And also I should mention, the Steelers are one of the best teams at identifying talent at that position. You go back to Antonio Brown in the 6th round, Mike Wallace in a late round, Emmanuel Sanders,
Hines Ward. You could go back, seriously, Plaxico Burress, 2 or 3 decades.
Exactly, absolutely. And Mike Tomlin did play wide receiver in college, so it seems like he knows something about what it takes to be successful at that position. So I have faith that they've picked the right guy in Roman Wilson. My question is, how quickly can he get up to speed and start being a factor?
Gotcha.
You referenced just the wide open nature of this receiver core, and there's a lot of remember some guys type receivers on this team: Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller, Quez Watkins, Calvin Austin still in the Steelers. Marquez Callaway is on the Steelers, apparently. Des Fitzpatrick. I mean, who do you think? You don't know. Like, you're just like, who do you think is emerging triumphant in these second and third spots when the dust settles in training camp?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, the way wide receivers work, a lot of these guys are going to rotate and they're going to get opportunities. But other than the two that we've mentioned so far, I think Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin would be the next two names to think about there. Van Jefferson, he's a bigger body. He's about 6'1". You could see he has, a little bit of thickness and a little bit of strength to the way that he plays the game. He also has some speed. I think he ran a 4.39 40-yard dash in 2020 coming out of the combine, which would marry well with Russell Wilson in the deep ball. And then Calvin Austin is intriguing because he missed his whole rookie year to a foot injury. His second year last year, he showed a lot of flashes with the ball in his hands in the return game as a punt returner. But again, he was another guy that was maybe a victim of an inept offense that it was hard to judge any receiver when Matt Canada's calling the plays and Kenny's throwing the football. So, the receiver coach, Zach Azzani, mentioned Calvin Austin specifically unprompted as one of the guys that he's felt has taken a big step forward this offseason. And it is going to be a pivotal year for Calvin Austin, going into year 3 to prove, he's not an afterthought. He's not just a punt returner. He can be a legitimate receiver in this league. He's a shorter guy for sure in stature, but has legitimate track speed to get behind the defense. So, I think that maybe he's a guy that intrigues me just because of that speed and because of that, untapped potential with him really only playing one full season so far.
We had a few staff members hyping up Calvin Austin last year. So they're listening to this thing. Oh yes, that's right. This time it counts. Mike, you've given us so much time. One more question. I hope it's a softball. Sometimes it's not a softball, though. Who is someone, and during OTAs, we know you're not seeing like the full offense. They're not wearing pads. Just who's a Steelers skill player that during OTAs maybe surprised you, stood out in a good way, or maybe even stood out in a bad way?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched upon a number of these guys. I guess the one guy maybe we haven't talked about is Darnell Washington. And when the Steelers drafted him, he's a very, very unique body type. He's a tight end, but he's so big that he proudly calls himself the sixth lineman. And last year, the Steelers essentially just made him a lineman. He only blocked. They threw him a handful of passes, if that, including one of those came from Connor Hayward on a trick play. So now with Arthur Smith, not only is he going to use tight ends much more, but he's going to diversify what he's asking them to do. And so I look at a guy like Darnell Washington, and he should be the type of guy that basically whatever the defense does, you make them wrong. If they line up in a certain defense and they've got a small personnel on the field, well, then you split him out wide, and now he's got a great matchup and he can jump over a guy. Or, if they're in a different one, you can condense the sets and hurt them that way. So, I'm just mostly looking for them to show all of the reasons why Darnell Washington was an intriguing piece, because right now he's just, as I mentioned, become kind of an afterthought blocking tight end. But if you really use him in all the diverse ways that he's capable of, then he becomes a very interesting weapon and a nice Swiss Army knife for your offense.
He was a 3rd-round pick last year too, so I do feel like this guy's kind of calling Arthur Smith's name, like, oh baby.
Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of 1 target, 1 touchdown games out of Darnell Washington. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. But he told me that his brother, just to give you a little backstory on him, was a Marine and was really influential in his life. And so he has a special touchdown dance dialed up to salute his brother in the Marines.
Cool.
And so he never had the opportunity last year. We'll see if maybe this year he gets a chance to bust out that celebration.
I like his chances.
I do too. Darnell Washington, by the way, would be a very scary Marine. Like this would be
he's a beast. Yeah, he's like 6'7", like 280, 290 pounds. He he is maybe one of the biggest and most physically dominant players in that locker room.
Wow.
He would be the largest cadet in the history of the Marine Corps. Mike, really, really good stuff. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Tell our listeners where they can find you. We know they can find you at The Athletic, now the New York Times. You got to transition to saying in the New York Times. To say, yeah, I work for the New York Times. It's fine. Where can they find you on social media? What might you be working on right now for The Athletic?
Yeah, so you can find all my work on The Athletic, and then also on Twitter, you can find me at Mike DeFabo. We're going to have a ton of stuff, observations for all the people who are Steelers fans who can't be there, or people who are wanting to keep track of what's going on at training camp. I also should have a couple big features coming up. Arthur Smith returns to Atlanta week 1. Russell Wilson returns to Denver week 2. I'm sure we'll have.
How was that possible?
Exactly.
Totally.
Schedule makers may have realized the connections there when they planned that. So, some stories looking at both of those guys and their returns for sure coming up. So definitely be sure to check it out.
Awesome stuff. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And if you're listening, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're going to be back for just a few quick minutes to end the show. We'll be right back after this. We are inching closer to watching Noah Lyles and more of America's elite athletes compete for gold in the Summer Olympics. It all starts on Friday evening with the opening ceremony in Paris, then prepare for the best in the world to compete over the ensuing 2 weeks in France, only on NBC and Peacock. Wish I had gotten to the Olympic read earlier in the show, Denny, because I feel like I'm not doing it justice. But we're going to be talking a lot about the Olympics this week.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk very briefly about the Cleveland Browns. And just is it to the point where we worry about DeShaun Watson dragging down this entire offensive operation in Cleveland?
Yes, because basically everybody else has been good in this system, in Kevin Stefanski's very quarterback-friendly system, except for Watson. And I suppose that the constant injuries are maybe the primary reason for that. So maybe if he's healthy and maybe if he can stay healthy for a little while, things could work out. But yeah, I do find myself worrying about that. I will say the one guy I don't worry about too much is David Njoku, and I think that his ADP is very reasonable, and he's sort of
it's on the low side. I feel like it's kind of low almost.
Right.
It's very reasonable. Reasonable is one way to put it. You could argue it's low at tight end 11.
Absolutely, yeah, 11, yeah, right. And he's like a locked in top 10 tight end, and really he could easily be a top 5 guy. Fourth in pass routes last year. He was 7th best in yards per route run among tight ends. Super efficient, gets downfield looks, which you can't say for a whole lot of tight ends. So he's not just a scam. But the good thing is about Njoku, he's sometimes a scam and a guy who sees downfield looks. When you can combine that, that's awesome.
I'll say every tight end is a scam in one way or another. We already know that. But off the top of your head, David Njoku, tight end 11, or Brock Bowers, tight end 10. Who are you taking?
Oh my gosh, it's not even in the same.
Well, the Pat Cranes of the world got Bowers at tight end 10 apparently somehow.
What? No, it's not. To me, it's not even close. Are you kidding me?
I agree, and we'll somehow be wrong.
I wouldn't take Bowers at tight end 20.
Wow.
You kidding? Are you kidding? I take Michael Mayer over Bowers.
The bank examiner is now he's getting your deck surveyed. It's like, I could do beautiful stuff with this wing. Of the deck.
Come on.
I could do
Come on. I'm sorry. Have you heard the Raiders talk about Bowers? They're like, this is a guy. This is a guy. This is the spot for the Traeger right here. He can run and he can catch. They don't even know what he can do. They have no idea how to use that guy.
Yeah, the bankings, they know your family's still in Greece. They're going to come by this week, so as not to embarrass you. Like, sir, I know, like, we didn't want to do this in front of your family. We're getting ready to repossess.
I appreciate that, but also David Njoku is going to score triple the fantasy points that Brock Bowers is going to.
I do agree. I just can't wait to see it until we're somehow wrong about that. I could not agree more, though. I feel like there's been very little Nick Chubb discourse, and maybe it's just because we're not getting Nick Chubb updates. He has begun camp on the PUP list. He's coming up on a year where he should be already kind of cleared to go and all that. But it seems like the injury was as bad as it looked. He's currently the RB 40. Is that a point where you view Nick Chubb as free value, free money, almost no downside? or are you still just steering clear entirely of the situation?
I mean, RB40, like even if he has a setback or is not ready until November or December, that's still okay. You can work with that. And especially if you're doing like 0 RB or some variation of it, it'd be good to stash a guy like that. But very serious injury. I'm tired of pretending that these guys can come back from these serious injuries. I should say at 100%.
Yeah.
The year after
he retired.
So I don't know. I just feel like I'm just tired of doing that whole game. We did that with Jamal Charles in his final couple years. Like, let's just stop. Okay. Like that was a potential career ender as far as being an elite running back goes. So I guess I take him there, but he's not someone I'm targeting now.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. RB40 is the first ADP where I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. You should probably mix in some Nick Chubb shares there because it is within the realm of possibility that he's cleared for week 1 and he's just Nick Chubb. That's by far not the most. It's not the most likely outcome at all. It's not one of the top 3 or 4. But I feel like it is within the range of outcomes that they're just being cagey and that they're ready to unleash Nick Chubb.
That would be shocking. I mean,
it would be shocking, but
I feel like the best case scenario is like he gets like a couple snaps in week 1 and then like 10% in week 2 and then rest for week 3 and then
that's most likely. That is most likely.
And then we spend all season being like, well, he did run 4 routes and they increased it to 22% this week. I mean, it's just going to be exhausting.
4 routes would be a career high for Nick Chubb.
I know. It really would.
I was going to ask about Jerry Jeudy. We should probably just end the show.
I will say just real quick, Amari Cooper agreed to a new deal with the Browns as we were podcasting, gets a $5 million raise or bonus to his current contract and an additional $20 million guaranteed, meaning 80 of the 100 million he's going to be paid is fully guaranteed. So he's back with the team for this season.
Oh, interesting. So I don't really understand how the Browns operate their front office, but it seems to have been working for a while.
Yeah.
See, this show has been working. Thank you so much to our guests, Ben Baby and Mike DeFabo. Really, really good stuff from some of the top beat writers in the entire industry.
Yeah.
Been around. Really, really great source of information. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard it. Have you heard he's played ESPN and The Athletic? Anyone heard of that?
I have not. No, I'm kidding. Of course.
Wow. So, thank you so much to them for taking the time. Thank you so much for Denny for coming back and finally gracing us with his knowledge. Again, we've missed you.
Yes, I miss being on there.
The best in the business, Denny Carter. So we're glad he's back. And we'll be back on Thursday with Mr. Kyle Dvorchak.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com. And I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched. Or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Rotoworld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.